Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man's Court Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reacting to three more scary storyteller channels for y'all. And the first one is Midnight Nightmare, and the video that I'll be reacting to is 4 horrific true church horror stories. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
I had always enjoyed the sense of community that came with attending church.
Right.
The familiar faces, the comforting rituals, and the serene atmosphere always provided a sense of peace. That sense of peace was shattered one summer when I volunteered to help out at a suburban church during their renovation. The church had been around for decades, a modest building with a white steeple and stained glass windows that depicted scenes from the Bible.
First of all, I do agree with this person says. Going to a church, you get a feeling of peace and comfort surrounded by other nice people. But also, I wish there was a church around here that had stained glass windows because that'd be nice to walk in and see. But anyway, let's continue with the story and see what happens next.
Father Thomas, the parish priest, was a kind man who welcomed everyone with open arms. When he asked for volunteers to help renovate the church, I eagerly signed up. It seemed like a good way to give back to the community and spend some extra time in a place I loved.
Oh, of course.
I arrived early on the first day, greeted by the cheerful sounds of birds chirping and the warm sun casting long shadows on the church's facade. Inside, I found Father Thomas and a few other volunteers discussing the day's tasks. "Good morning, everyone," Father Thomas said, smiling. "Today, we'll start by clearing out the storage room in the basement. It's been years since anyone's gone through it, so there might be some surprises." We made our way to the basement, a cool, dimly lit space with stone walls and a low ceiling. The storage room was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and dusty relics from past generations.
Makes you wonder why did this Father Thomas or any other clergyman before him did not even go through it and dispose what they didn't want. But of course, I know they had to get ready for their services, so they wouldn't have time to mess with it themselves. But I tell you one thing, I'll be wondering, what does this got to do with the renovation process of the church? Unless they work from the ground up, basically.
As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were disturbing something that had been at rest for a long time.
Probably.
Around midday, we took a break and gathered in the kitchen for lunch. That's when Father Thomas mentioned the new parishioner. "Her name is Margaret," he said, sipping his coffee. "She's just moved to the area and is eager to get involved with the church. She should be here any minute." As if on cue, the door creaked open and a woman stepped inside. Margaret was tall and thin, with long, dark hair that hung in loose waves around her pale face. Her eyes were strikingly blue, almost unnaturally so, and she had an air of quiet intensity that made me feel uneasy.
Makes you wonder, does she have something to do with you guys clearing out the basement? Like, is she a full solid ghost? Because that would be creepy to see a woman, pale skin and then bright blue eyes staring at you. But then again, it might have been just a coincidence that she showed up right when they were starting to do all these renovations. But we'll never know.
"Welcome, Margaret," Father Thomas said warmly. "We're glad to have you with us." Margaret nodded and offered a faint smile. "Thank you, Father. I'm happy to be here." Despite her polite demeanor, there was something about Margaret that set me on edge. As we resumed our work in the basement, I found myself glancing at her often, trying to figure out what it was that made me so uneasy. She moved gracefully, almost too gracefully, as if she was gliding rather than walking. And her eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to see right through me. The first few days went by without incident. We made good progress on clearing out the storage room, and Margaret quickly became a regular part of our group. But my unease around her never faded. It was like a shadow that followed me, always lurking at the edge of my consciousness. One evening, as we were wrapping up for the day, Father Thomas asked Margaret to stay behind for a moment. I lingered nearby, curious to see what they would discuss. Margaret, Father Thomas began, I wanted to talk to you about your involvement in the church. You've been a wonderful help, but I've noticed something unusual about you. Margaret's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something dark in her eyes. Unusual, Father. Yes, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I've sensed a presence around you, something that doesn't belong here. I believe it might be affecting you. For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then, her lips curled into a cold smile. You're very perceptive, Father. But you have no idea what you're dealing with.
Oh, crap. I guarantee you that she must have a demon bound to her. But that'd be creepy to hear the father talking to this woman about it.
Before anyone could react, Margaret's body convulsed, and a guttural growl erupted from her throat. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor, writhing and thrashing as if in the grip of some unseen force. Dear God, Father Thomas whispered, crossing himself. It's a possession. Panic set in as we watched Margaret's body contort and her voice distort into a deep, malevolent tone. You cannot save her, the voice hissed. She belongs to us now. Father Thomas acted quickly, ordering us to hold her down while he fetched his Bible and holy water. We struggled to keep Margaret restrained, her strength unnaturally powerful as she fought against us. Her eyes, now completely white, stared at us with a hatred that seemed to pierce our very souls. Father Thomas returned, his face pale but determined. He opened his Bible and began reciting prayers, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. He sprinkled holy water on Margaret, and she screamed, a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the basement.
Yep, a normal person would not do that when they get splashed with holy water. So that says she's convulsing and rolling her eyes back. She got a demon possessing her. Makes me wonder what was hiding in that basement that got unleashed and attached itself to her. But that would be very creepy to see at a church.
The struggle seemed to go on forever. Margaret's body twisted and convulsed, her screams filling the air. The oppressive atmosphere in the room grew heavier, and it felt as if the very walls were closing in on us. But Father Thomas did not waver, his prayers growing louder and more forceful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Margaret's body went limp, and the room fell silent. We released our grip on her, exhausted and shaken. Father Thomas knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. She's alive, he said, relief evident in his voice. But we need to get her help. Margaret was taken to a nearby hospital, where she remained in a catatonic state for several days. Father Thomas contacted a specialist in exorcisms, who agreed to take on Margaret's case. The ordeal was far from over, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. The events of that evening left a deep scar on our small community. The basement, once a place of hidden secrets, had become a place of terror and darkness. Father Thomas continued his work with unwavering faith, but the memory of Margaret's possession haunted him. As for me, I could never shake the feeling of those piercing blue eyes staring into my soul. The experience had shattered my sense of peace and left me with a lingering fear of the unknown. I still attended church, but the once comforting rituals now seemed tinged with an air of unease. Margaret eventually recovered, but she never returned to our church. The specialist who treated her claimed that the possession had been successfully banished, but I couldn't help but wonder if the darkness truly ever left her. The incident served as a chilling reminder that even in places of worship, where one seeks solace and sanctuary, the shadows of the unknown can lurk, waiting for the right moment to strike.
You got that right. It don't matter if you do one exorcism on a person, the darkness will always come back. I still can't believe that they would have like an evil presence in a house of worship. I can see why people don't go back to church if they experience something like this, because what he was saying about words can be tinged and don't bring comfort to you after you experience something like that is true. I'm just sorry that that happened to you while you were helping do some renovation of the church. But let's get to story number 2.
I had always been fascinated by history, particularly the history of old buildings. So, when I was offered the opportunity to stay in a historic rectory attached to a century-old church, I eagerly accepted. The rectory, with its tall, imposing structure and Gothic architecture, seemed like the perfect place to immerse myself in the past.
You know, since I'm sort of a history buff, I wouldn't mind exploring an old church and rectory like this that's got like a Gothic cathedral looking presence to it. But I'll be making sure that no evil spirits will be roaming around, especially if the whole church is abandoned but still intact.
The church itself was a magnificent building, with towering spires and intricate stained glass windows. The rectory, however, had a more somber air about it. It was a large, two-story building made of dark stone, with ivy creeping up the walls and windows that seemed to watch you as you approached. Father Michael, the parish priest, welcomed me warmly. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He showed me around the rectory, pointing out the various rooms and sharing stories about the building's history. This rectory has been here for over 100 years, he said, his voice echoing in the empty hallways. Many priests have lived here, and each one has left their mark. It's a place rich with history. I nodded, taking in the grand staircase, the high ceilings, and the antique furniture that filled the rooms. It was beautiful, but there was also something unsettling about the place. It felt like the walls were holding secrets, whispering stories of the past that were just out of reach.
I tell you what, I would be fascinated if I walked into a place this big. But if it's stained with dark secrets, I would definitely be creeped out like this person is describing.
My first night in the rectory was uneventful. I settled into my room, a cozy space with a large four-poster bed and a view of the churchyard. I fell asleep quickly, the day's excitement and the comfort of the old, creaky bed lulling me into a deep slumber. It was on the second night that things began to change. I was awoken in the middle of the night by a strange noise. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but as I lay there, listening, I realized it was something else. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway outside my room. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside my door. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sounds. For a moment, there was silence, and then the doorknob began to turn. Panic surged through me, and I leapt out of bed, rushing to the door and yanking it open. The hallway was empty, the only light coming from the moon shining through the windows. I stepped out, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor, and looked around. There was no one there. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, every creak and groan of the old house setting my nerves on edge.
I'll be wondering what on earth is lingering through that old rectory that's making them hear noises in the night. Spirit of a former pastor or something else that is not so friendly.
By morning, I was exhausted but determined to find out what was going on. Over breakfast, I mentioned the incident to Father Michael. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You're not the first to experience something like this," he said after a moment. "This rectory has a history of strange occurrences. Some say it's haunted by the spirits of former priests who lived here." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but there was something about Father Michael's tone that made me reconsider. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. I would hear footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing on their own, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One night, I awoke to find my room freezing cold, my breath visible in the air despite the warm summer weather.
See, what did I tell you? The father confirmed it, that it's former priests that occupied the place. If I heard that, I'd be spooked out completely. They're probably just carrying on their sacred duty, even in the afterlife, so you shouldn't be harmed by that. But I would be kind of disturbed and uncomfortable if the room temperature got cold like he's describing.
I began to feel like I was being watched. No matter where I went in the rectory, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were following my every move. It was an oppressive, suffocating sensation that made it difficult to focus on anything else. Father Michael tried to reassure me, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He admitted that he had experienced similar things during his time in the rectory, but he had learned to live with it. It's part of the history of this place, he said. The spirits here are restless, but they mean no harm. They are simply present. Despite his words, I found it increasingly difficult to stay in the rectory. The constant feeling of unease, the strange noises, and the chilling cold all wore me down. I began to dread the nights, knowing that I would once again be confronted by the unknown. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, I noticed a small door at the end of the hallway that I hadn't seen before. It was partially hidden by a tapestry, and I felt a strange compulsion to open it. I walked over and pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a flashlight and started down the stairs. The air grew colder as I descended, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old, dusty books, and in the center of the room was a large wooden chest. I approached the chest, my heart pounding. It was covered in strange symbols, and I could feel a palpable sense of dread emanating from it. I hesitated, then reached out and opened the lid. Inside, I found a collection of old, yellow documents. As I sifted through them, I realized they were records of exorcisms performed in the rectory over the past century.
Oh, you shouldn't have been opening up that lid of that chest then. If it's got something to do with exorcisms, I guarantee you there's some powerful demon spirits still lingering around that thing. Put all the documents back and close the lid now.
Each one detailed the torment of a priest who had lived there, describing the same experiences I had been having: the footsteps, the whispers, the cold. The final document caught my eye. It was a letter from a priest who had lived in the rectory 50 years ago. His words sent a chill down my spine. I fear that the rectory is cursed. The spirits here are not simply restless, they are malevolent. They seek to drive us away, to claim this place as their own. I do not know how much longer I can withstand their torment. I returned to my room, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't stay in the rectory any longer. The malevolent presence was too strong, too oppressive. I packed my things and left that night, vowing never to return. As I drove away, I glanced back at the rectory one last time. In the moonlight, it looked like a shadowy specter, its dark windows staring out into the night. I shuddered and turned my attention back to the road, determined to put the experience behind me.
Yeah, I was about to say, turn your head back to the road before you cause your car to veer off into a ditch. But I figured that no priest's ghost would cause you that much discomfort by creeping you out at night and causing the temperature to drop. I'll be going to that Father Michael and telling him I found this old trunk with exorcism stuff in it. So whatever's happening here is not former pastors lingering around. it's something more darker and malevolent. But I'm glad that he did the right thing and just packed up and got on out of there, because I wouldn't stay another night either if it's all spooky and got a lot of dark vibes in it.
I had always been drawn to old buildings, their ancient walls whispering secrets of the past. So, when my friend Jake told me about the volunteer opportunity to help renovate the old church in our town, I jumped at the chance. The church, built in the late 1800s, had fallen into disrepair over the years. Its large, Gothic structure, complete with stained glass windows and towering spires, loomed over the small town, a reminder of an era long gone. The first few days were uneventful. We cleaned out old pews, removed cobwebs, and patched up cracks in the walls.
I gotta admit, I'm gonna have to agree with what he just said before in the beginning of the story, where old buildings do, in fact, hold on to past memories gone by. But it's kind of cool that there's people out there that would take interest in old buildings, especially churches, and revamp them to breathe new life to it and it be used for house of worship again. That's totally awesome.
It was hard work, but there was a certain satisfaction in seeing the place slowly come back to life. However, it wasn't long before we discovered the hidden door in the basement. Jake and I were moving some old crates when we noticed the unusual outline on one of the walls. It was subtle, but upon closer inspection, we could see that there was a door hidden behind the layers of dust and grime. Our curiosity piqued. We pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the depths of the church. Should we go down? Jake asked, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Why not? Let's see what's down there, I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. The air grew colder as we descended the stairs, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, dimly lit room. The only source of light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we saw that the room was filled with strange artifacts, old books with yellowed pages, rusty chains, and what looked like ceremonial robes. What is this place? Jake muttered, picking up one of the books. I don't know, but it's giving me the creeps.
I mean, truth be told, if I went down to a basement of a church and saw that they were describing old robes and rusty chains, I'd be wondering, what in the world is all this stuff doing down here? Like, was this all used for the church ceremonies, or was there something darker happening there and nobody else don't know about it? Who knows?
Admitted, feeling a shiver run down my spine. As we explored the room, we found more disturbing items, animal bones arranged in strange patterns, jars filled with unknown substances, and a large, ancient-looking chest in the corner. The chest was locked, but we could see symbols carved into its surface, symbols that looked like they belonged in a horror movie. This is some serious horror movie stuff, Jake said, echoing my thoughts. Let's get out of here, I said, my unease growing by the second. But just as we turned to leave, we heard it, a whispering voice, soft and barely audible, but definitely there. Did you hear that? Jake asked, his face pale. Yeah, let's go, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We hurried up the stairs, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each step. By the time we reached the top, we were practically running. We slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. What the hell was that? Jake gasped. I don't know, but I don't want to find out, I replied, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Over the next few days, things only got worse. The whispers followed us wherever we went, growing louder and more menacing. We saw shadows moving out of the corners of our eyes, and strange symbols began appearing on the walls, seemingly etched by an unseen hand. The other volunteers noticed the changes too, and soon everyone was on edge. One night, I was working late, trying to finish painting one of the rooms. I had just started cleaning up when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see Jake or one of the other volunteers, but there was no one there. The room was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty church. There was no response, but I could feel someone watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed my things and hurried out of the church, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, Jake didn't show up for work. I called him, but there was no answer. I went to his house, but his roommate said he hadn't seen him since the previous night. Panic set in, and I rushed back to the church, hoping to find some clue about his whereabouts. As I walked through the darkened halls, the whispers grew louder, filling my ears with their insistent, unintelligible words. I made my way to the basement, dreading what I might find. When I reached the hidden room, I saw the door was ajar, and a cold draft wafted up the stairs. "Jake?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I descended the stairs, the whispers growing louder with each step. The room was just as we had left it, but the chest in the corner was now open. Inside, I found a diary, its pages filled with frantic, handwritten notes. The entries told the story of a previous priest who had become obsessed with dark rituals, believing they would grant him eternal life. He had hidden the room from the rest of the congregation, conducting his sinister ceremonies in secret.
Oh, that's why that room exists. I was just about to say, what did you guys stumble across? But it makes you wonder what happened to his friend that didn't show up to work. Did he got so scared he run away, or is he dead? Like, I want to know what happened to him, because that'd be kind of spooky that you call his friend and he said he had showed up at their apartment and he wasn't in the church. I'd be like, something suspicious is afoot.
The diary ended abruptly with a final, desperate plea for forgiveness. As I read the last entry, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but there was no one there. The whispers were deafening now, filling my mind with their dark, insistent demands. I stumbled out of the room, barely able to see through the tears of fear in my eyes. I ran out of the church, the whispers following me all the way until I finally reached the safety of my car. Later, I found out that Jake had moved out of town, but we never spoke again. The church was eventually closed off, declared unsafe for renovations. But the whispers never stopped. They followed me, haunting my dreams and filling my waking hours with dread. I knew I would never escape the darkness we had unleashed in that secret room, and the fear would be my constant companion.
I cannot believe a pastor would actually perform dark rituals in a secret room at the church. Just to think that he would grant eternal life, but he didn't know what he was doing and conjured up some other stuff instead. Man, yeah, if his congregation found out he was doing that, they would have had him excommunicated from the church and get a new preacher to come in and take over. But before renovations even continue, I will make sure an exorcism is performed just so any dark stuff would leave and all the artifacts of that preacher was moved out. Because if you want to renovate that place back into a place of worship, you don't want nothing like that in there. Because nobody wouldn't attend if they keep hearing whispers or feeling a dark presence near them. But I'm just glad that his friend's okay and this guy telling the story was all right.
Growing up in a small town, I always found solace in the simplicity and familiarity of my surroundings.
Right.
The old church at the edge of town, with its quaint steeple and welcoming congregation, was a cornerstone of our community. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the church played a significant role in our lives. So, when the opportunity arose to participate in a church retreat, I eagerly signed up. The retreat was to be held at an old, secluded church in the countryside, far from the noise and distractions of modern life. The idea was to spend a weekend in reflection, prayer, and community, and I was looking forward to the peace and quiet. We arrived on a chilly Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. The church was even more picturesque than I had imagined, surrounded by tall trees and with a small graveyard to one side. The building itself was made of stone, with ivy climbing up the walls and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the ground. Our group consisted of about 20 people, including Father Luca, who had organized the retreat. He was a kind and gentle man, with a deep voice that was soothing to listen to. After settling into our rooms in the attached rectory, we gathered in the church for an evening service. As we sang hymns and listened to Father Luca's sermon, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The church was dimly lit, with candles providing a warm, flickering light. The atmosphere was serene, and I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on my life and my faith. After the service, we shared a simple meal and then retired to our rooms. The rectory was old but well maintained, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and heavy, antique furniture. My room was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed and a window that overlooked the churchyard. That night, I slept deeply, the events of the day lulling me into a restful slumber.
I bet since everything was going swell, you guys found your rooms and have a nice service before you do the rest of your retreat. But I guarantee you, that restful slumber is going to be rudely disturbed. But I don't want to jump ahead, so let's continue.
It was around midnight when I was abruptly awakened by a sound that sent a chill down my spine.
Told you.
It was the faint sound of singing. At first, I thought I was still dreaming, but as I sat up in bed, I realized the sound was real. It was coming from the church. The singing was hauntingly beautiful, a chorus of voices harmonizing in a hymn that was both familiar and strange. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped out of bed, pulling on a sweater against the cold. I made my way quietly through the dark rectory and out into the churchyard. The night was still and silent, except for the ethereal music that seemed to float on the air. As I approached the church, the singing grew louder. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me made my heart skip a beat. The church was filled with people. Men, women, and children, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing, were standing in the pews, singing in perfect harmony.
Okay, at that point, I'll be freaking out because I'll be like, where do these people come from? And why are they dressed like that? But what he's seeing is ghosts of the former occupants that used to come to worship at that church from years ago.
Their faces were serene, their eyes closed as if lost in prayer. The candles on the altar burned brightly, casting an otherworldly glow over the scene. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to move. It was as if I had stepped back in time, witnessing a service from a bygone era. The music was mesmerizing, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. But then, something changed. The temperature in the church dropped suddenly, and the singing took on a darker, more ominous tone. The faces of the congregation twisted into expressions of anguish, and the air grew thick with a sense of foreboding. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned to leave, I saw Father Lucas standing at the back of the church, watching me. His expression was grave, and he motioned for me to come to him. I hurried over, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Father Luca led me outside, closing the door behind us. The singing stopped abruptly, and the night was once again silent. What was that? I asked, my voice trembling. Father Luca sighed, looking weary. This church has a history, he said. Many years ago, a terrible tragedy occurred here. A fire broke out during a service, and many lives were lost. Some say the spirits of those who perished still linger, trapped in an eternal service. I shivered, the weight of his words sinking in. Why didn't you tell us? I didn't want to scare anyone, he replied. The spirits are usually peaceful, content to hold their nightly service. But sometimes, they become restless, especially when there are new people around. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur. The other members of the retreat seemed unaware of the night's events, and I didn't mention it to anyone. Father Luca and I agreed to keep it between us, not wanting to cause unnecessary fear. I left the retreat with a heavy heart, the memory of the phantom choir haunting my thoughts. The experience had shaken me to my core, challenging my beliefs and leaving me with more questions than answers. Years have passed since that fateful weekend, but I still find myself thinking about the old church and its ghostly congregation. The memory of their singing, both beautiful and terrifying, lingers in my mind. To this day, I avoid churches at night, the fear of encountering another phantom service too great to ignore. The experience has changed me, instilling a deep respect for the unknown and the unseen. While I may never fully understand what happened that night, I have come to accept that some things are beyond explanation, existing in the shadows between our world and the next.
Man, that is just so sad to hear that a congregation all perished during the service because of a fire breaking out in there. I just hope one day those spirits know that they can move on, but it's still creepy to experience an old church. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more midnight nightmare content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Square channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and that's a wrap. Have a nice day.